Good evening, gentlemen and ladies. Uh, Continuing with our series of web seminar, we have today an excellent panel. We are debating the provision of Section 397 CRPC, and today on the panel we are joined by Justice Ahluwalia. We all have very fond memories of him in our High Court as a senior counsel and later as a spectacular judge. He is going to share the panel with Mr. Vinod Ghai. He's one of our foremost criminal lawyers here. We have the immaculate Mr. Chitrat Palli moderating for us all the way from Delhi. Before I hand over the mantle to our moderator for the day, I'll take a very quick second to explain how the mechanics of the seminar will work. In case once the panelists are done and we open the floor to questions, which I would sort of encourage everyone to ask, how you interact with the software, with the GoToWebinar, is very simple. If you wish as an attendee to ask a question, you will see on your screen there is a button with the shape of a hand. Please click on it. What that does is it highlights you to us and it gives us a sort of advance warning that you wish to ask a question. And what we will do is, in a chronological order, we'll connect you and we will connect you straight to the panel. If for whatever reason you feel that you would want us to ask the question on your behalf, in that case you will see that there is a subheading called questions in the panel before you. Click on it, write your question, it will be sent to us and we will do our best to put it to the panel per se. If you find that there is some kind of a technological issue or you want some kind of clarification while the seminar is ongoing, you are free to either use the questions tab or the tab aptly labeled chat. That will connect you to the organizers and we'll be able to answer whatever, to the best of our ability, whatever your issues are while the seminar is going on. With that, I'll hand over the mantle to our moderator for the day. Mr. Palli, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening to our esteemed panelists. The topic for today is criminal revision and its interplay with Section 482 of the CRPC. At the outset, I must point out that the provisions under this chapter are triggered in case there is an absence of an appeal or an appeal is specifically barred by the statute. Divisional jurisdiction is exercised to cure and correct an illegality and impropriety that seeped into the orders of the subordinate criminal court. As we all know, sections 397 to 401 deal with the revisionary powers. Now, section 397(1) talks about three things: what, when, and where. What is revisable? Every order, sentence, or finding of the subordinate criminal court is revisable. When is it revisable? It is revisable whenever there is any illegality or any impropriety in the order, sentence, finding, or procedure adopted by the subordinate criminal court. Where and before whom your criminal revision lies, it is either before the sessions court or before the high court that the criminal revision will lie. Now, section 397(2) restricts the power of section 397(1). It imposes an express bar from challenging interlocutory orders in a criminal revision. However, that was not always the case. To put things in perspective, I would like to briefly just narrate a legislative history of the provision involved so that our viewers get a greater idea and a broader understanding of the issue at hand. Under the 1868 Code of Criminal Procedure, the powers of review were much wider than what we see today. Under the 1868 Code, each and every order was revisable. Even an interlocutory order was revisable. And this continued to be the position even after the 1955 amendment in the Code of Criminal Procedure. With the flux of time, litigants started misusing this provision, and one could see a lot of interlocutory orders being challenged in a criminal revision before the Sessions Court and the High Court. The 14th and the 41st Law Commission was able to detect this as one of the major reasons why the criminal justice system was being thwarted. Trials and prosecutions could not happen seamlessly only because litigants were thronging to courts challenging their interlocutory orders in a revisional jurisdiction. So they recommended to Parliament that we must banish and dispense with this idea of challenging an interlocutory order before a revisional court. The Parliament, acting upon the recommendations of the Law Commission, thereafter enacted Section 397(2), as we today know it, which imposes an express bar against challenging interlocutory orders before the Sessions Court and the High Court. Now, to my mind, and in my humble opinion, this is where the heart of the dispute lies as to what is an interlocutory order. It is a confused, muddled space which is open to complete judicial speculation and interpretation. It is not codified, it is not defined anywhere. And it is only by way of judicial verdicts and judicial precedents are we able to ascertain whether a particular order is an interlocutory order or not. And that often leads to conflicting opinions coming from different high courts because courts try and give this amorphous concept shape and form on a case-to-case basis. Now, having given this broad overview of the topic, I'm sure the panelists will delve deeper into the provisions of this chapter, explain to us the nuances involved, and give us an account of the practical difficulties that advocates today face when they're before a provisional court. Without further ado, I would invite Mr. Vinod Ghai, who is a senior advocate, to deconstruct Section 397 and to explain to us the practical applicability of the said section. It's over to you, Mr. Ghai.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Palli. It's in fact a great honor to be on this platform and sharing my views with all you. And of course, a great privilege to be with Justice Ahluwalia, from whom we have learned, everybody has learned from him. So as far as the discussion is concerned, Mr. Palli, what I have learned from my father is that we always discuss, because discussion is exchange of knowledge. I never argue in the court also, because argument is exchange of ignorance, exchange of knowledge, which we are going to do here, and nobody is perfect as far as law is concerned. So I'm also here to learn from all of you. And I was desperate to meet everybody, so I had the opportunity to meet virtually to all the members here. So as far as revision is concerned, revision is not different. Revision has been left to the courts to be defined to the parameters laid down in the statute. So unlike appeal, it is not a statutory right. It is the discretion of the courts to be used when the court feels there's some illegality, impropriety, or the order passed by the lower court is against the law. Now, as far as the revision is concerned, I'll give the first a few things about the jurisdiction also. Now, revision jurisdiction is a supervisory jurisdiction. The higher courts have supervision, but the lower court, you can say, umbrella of jurisdiction to see, to do which is undo, which is wrong, and to do what is right. So this is the jurisdiction of the higher courts as a supervision over the lower courts, that they are acting according to the law, and they are also deciding the facts according to law. So as far as the jurisdiction of revisional jurisdiction by the courts is concerned, CRPC under Section 399, 400 and 401 has defined the jurisdiction. The Sessions Court has under 399 the jurisdiction. The Additional Session Judge has a jurisdiction under Section 400, and 401 is for the High Court. Now, as far as the powers of Session Court and Additional Session Judges are concerned, under 399 and 400 are concerned, they are the same as given by 401 to the High Court. So they enjoy the same powers in revision as the High Court under 401. So as far as the powers of the High Court are concerned, now these are defined. I'm audible, Mr. Palli?
Yes, sir.
As far as the powers of revision, powers of the court in revision are concerned, let us try to have Section 397, which is the main section for revision. Now, firstly, I'll explain 397 in my own words, because 397, what does the 397 says? 397.1 says High Court or Session Court. Now, I said 399, 400, and 401. So, High Court and Session Judge, the power of revision is with these courts only. The High Court and the Session Court may. So, may means it is the discretion of the court. It is not a right as in. So, High Court and Session Court may. What can it do? It can call for the record. Now it can call for the record. For what? It can call for the record to examine. Courts will examine. The courts will examine the correctness, legality, and propriety. These three things the court will examine. And the subject matter of examining these three things will be the order, finding, and the sentence passed by these courts. The courts which are lower to these courts, which are supervisory courts, the orders, sentences, and the finding passed by these courts will be gone into by calling for record and examining. This is after examining the records. What the court will do is the court can even see the regularity. If there is some irregularity in the decision, then the court can see. And after going forward, the court can direct the execution of the sentence or order be suspended. I'm just saying 397(1) in my own words, that after going through the record, examining the record, checking all these three things on the subject, which I said, and any proceedings, the court can pass an order directing that execution be suspended. The court can also, if the person is in custody, ask him to be released on bail. Now, this is 397(1). We can read the section also, but I would like to say in my own word, which I have said. Of course, Justice Ahluwalia will also elaborate on this. Now, 397(1), the powers which I said may. This means the power is discretionary and to be used only if the court feels there is some illegality. It will not go into the facts of the case. Factual feature will not be gone into by the court, but the court can go into the facts if it feels that there is perversity, the case has been decided, or the order has been passed against the facts. So even then the court can interfere. Now there are two other exceptions given in 397, 397(2) and 397(3). Now the main grey matter is 397(2), which says the regional jurisdiction is for interlocutory, is not for interlocutory orders. So that is one. Number two, the revision can be either filed in the Sessions Court, one, or in the High Court. So both the courts have concurrent jurisdictions. But if you file revision in one court, it bars you filing of a second revision in the higher court. So you will file only one revision, although we have so many judgments which say that we have other remedies also. But as far as 397 is concerned, I would like to elaborate that 397(1) gives bars, 397(2) and 3 gives some exceptions. And we have some celebrated judgments on interlocutory orders starting from 1977. Of course, we have been learning from Sir also. Amarnath, Madhu Lime, V.C. Shukla, Giriraj Suneja. These are all celebrated judgments which will, of course, go through as we go on discussion. So as far as the revision is concerned, Mr. Palli, my main aim was that everybody should know that which courts have the jurisdiction and what type of jurisdiction. Like 227, jurisdiction 483, the jurisdiction is supervisory, that they can supervise these and act as parental courts as an umbrella, so that nothing is done which is illegal and against facts. So this is what I feel the revision is defined and how it is said to be having powers under 397 section. And I think I need not read 397, 1, 2, and 3. I have explained all these sections in my own word.
Yes, sir. I'd like to ask you a question, sir. Sir, one thing that perhaps we've not learned is that which party can file an application under section 397 for a revision?
As far as the filing of an application is concerned, Mr. Palli, there can be three things. One, the court can take suo motu cognizance of the matter. Like it is not like appeals. You know, it can be suo motu, or if an information is received by the court, even then the court can take cognizance and start with the revision. Third is a party can also file an application. A party who is affected, both sides can also file the application, and then the revisional jurisdiction can start. So it can be suo motu, or on information, or third on an application by a party concerned. So all these three things can be there to start with the jurisdiction of revision.
Sir, is it only that a state can file a revision, or are there other varieties of litigants as well?
Just see, I have said that it can be suo motu also. This means, and now even in, I remember one judgment in 1962, K. Chinnaswamy, where it was held that a private party can also come and file an application in revision. Now the question will be, if a private party comes, then the court go into the facts and the law differently than it did suo motu or an application by a person who is party to the case. So the scanning will be more by the court. That is all. Otherwise, according to me, a private party can also file.
Court here, Mr. Ghai. See, the very scheme of 397-401 is a power vested in a superior court. It's to correct any error.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
To correct error, read along with section 403, which says the court may not hear any party, court may not hear any pleader, and the court may decide at its own.
Yes. It can,
permit any.
It is not like appeal, sir. It is not like appeal.
And secondly, even a witness can come under revision. The umbrella is too wide. Say section 319, it is not restricted to the parties to the list. Any person who some way is concerned with the litigation, if he shows his bona fide, his locus, he can be permitted by the court. It is power of the court, our superior court, to correct any error which is manifest. So there I support Mr. Ghai, he has very well brought it out.
Please, sir.
It's a very pertinent point that section 397 uses the word.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bali. I'm sorry. You can go on. You can go on. Sorry. You can go on.
Please continue, sir.
I was saying that since the jurisdiction is suo motu or on any information, sir is right. If the court gets information from anybody, it can start with the revision.
I think that's why section 397 uses the word any person, and since any person is not defined, the width of those two words encompasses almost every single person, every single entity.
Yes.
Now, on that note, I will just ask Justice Ahluwalia that both the High Court and the Session Court have revisionary jurisdiction. Justice Ahluwalia, I would like you to explain to us the difference between the exercise of revisionary powers of the High Court and how are they different from the appellate powers exercised by the High Court.
Please understand, so for appellate powers are concerned, if we read 397, it gives power to the court to revise an order of the inferior court or a subordinate court. Now, what are the powers, how to use it? So for High Court is concerned, it comes in section 401. It says that the court exercising High Court will exercise the powers which are vested in under section 386, 389, and 390 and 307. So when we read 399, it says that the session shall be conferred with the same powers which are vested in the High Court by virtue of section 401. Therefore, the powers of the appellate court, powers of granting pardon, powers of suspending sentence, all powers vest in revisional court. So far, Session Court is concerned under section 399. The power which in additionally vest in High Court exclusively is the 482 will not vest in the Court of Sessions. This is exclusive to the High Court, inherent power given. So let's understand the difference between 397 and 482 first, while we dissect the sections. 482 says it is to prevent an abuse of the court, process of the court, or to secure the ends of justice. Whereas 397 says to correct legality or propriety of an order passed by any court below in regarding fine in respect of the finding, in respect of sentence or order. Therefore, so for Session that is concerned, he will have all the powers which are vested in the High Court by virtue of 401. That is the powers of the appeal also. To vest a power is one thing, to use is another. It is qualified by so many Lakshman Rekha, which by court by the self-restraint have evolved upon themselves. Say, revision against acquittal. So appeal against acquittal is permitted by virtue of section 401. You have the powers. But then the Supreme Court says, so far appeal against acquittal is concerned by another section, you will act only where evidence has been shut, where evidence has been available but made inadmissible. where evidence has been misread, there is a perversity. There are 5 qualifications the court will use in the 401 while exercising powers of the revision. Secondly, what is in a revisional code? Since the power is self-restricted, though the umbrella is too wide, the power given is too wide, but it is restricted by the courts by their own evolving that. Therefore, they say that even if on law and facts one views possible, the revisional court will not cause interference. In appeal, the court can appreciate, re-evaluate the evidence. The court says, so far the revisional court is concerned, it will not treat on the path of re-evaluation and re-appreciation of the evidence. This is again a self-restraint. Therefore, the revisional powers are very restrictive by usage. Though by power, they vest a lot of power in the court. Therefore, when you have to exceed it, go beyond the 401, the High Court always take recourse to 482, which a session court will not take into it. This is a distinction. This is a self-restraint which we have to take it. Now, say for instance, there is something grave injustice caused. There is a miscarriage of the justice. It will shake the conscience of the court. Then the court will not take recourse to the powers of the revision, even though the power of appeal vested, and the court will take recourse to section 482 because it has to prevent abuse of the process of the court or to secure ends of justice. So this is a distinction, though the power vests in the courts how to use it, in what matter to use it, and while using the court power under revision or 482, 2 things: fair play and fairness to others cannot be said. So, take for instance section 401 subsection 2. It is said that any party who will be prejudiced ought to be heard, if not given a chance, ought to be given an opportunity of hearing. So, for example, if the session court order of summoning is there, the court dismiss the revision, or the court magistrate dismiss the prayer of summoning the accused at that time, or accused is summoned at that time, accused is not required. But if a revision is filed, then 401 subsection 2, which also prima materia operate to under section 399, accused who was not present before the court below, if orders to pass against him, ought to be heard. So these are the mechanism. This is the scheme of things whereby we interpret powers of the revision of the court.
So one follow-up question that I have for you is that it's a fact-based scenario. I'll put a fact-based scenario and I'll try and seek an answer for that. So in case of a reversal of acquittal before the session judge, can the High Court in divisional jurisdiction block the reappreciation of evidence, even though this is the first appeal for the accused who is now turned a convict?
Let's understand. After till the CRPC was amended, right to appeal was vested in the victim. Then the complainant could only come if it is a complaint case under 374 to the High Court in appeal against acquittal. And if that's a state case, state files a revision against appeal against acquittal under section 377 CRPC, then the accused will file a revision against acquittal. The revision against acquittal will not lie before the session. But if magistrate has convicted and session judge has acquitted, and in that case, over the state is concerned, they will take recourse to appeal against acquittal. Now, by virtue of the amendment, victim can come to the High Court and file an appeal against acquittal. Before that, revision against acquittal will lie. So, for revision against acquittal is concerned, it was a self-restraint that High Court will not disturb the acquittal except for so-and-so reasons, and purposely also. If a High Court, being a superior court, will reverse the acquittal, it will be too difficult for the court below to acquit again, because power under the revision only gives power to remand the matter. If you read section 402, probably, in a revision, the court cannot disturb, while disturbing the acquittal, cannot cause conviction. It has to go to the same court back. Therefore, there is a reappreciation or re-evaluation, the evidence will not come. In the revision against acquittal, the courts have been very circumspect, acted with a lot of circumspection that they will not re-evaluate the evidence, they will not reappreciate, so that it will not, the findings will not bind the court below when the matter is remanded back.
Yes,
So
sir.
these are the,
One particular line from a Supreme Court judgment that resonated with me, and it's exactly what you're saying, is said that revisional court will not heavily load the dice against the accused. So the subordinate court will virtually be left with no alternative but to reverse the decision.
you have to keep the balance, because
Yes.
the courts have to ensure a fair trial, has not to cause a prejudice to anybody.
Yes, sir.
I can give
Sir,
the
the
judgment
next
also.
question I wish to put to you. Yes, sir. I think that will be helpful for all the viewers. I will post the citations later on, but if you have the judgment handy, I'd love to have the citation.
This is given in the section also by giving illustration. And this is Sheetala Prasad versus Srikanth, area 2010, Supreme Court 1140. Revisional jurisdiction can be exercised by High Court at the instance of private complaint. And then what are the tests? These are given in this judgment.
Right. I have noted this down and will be displayed to all the panelists. I'll put it in the chat box also.
Very well. This is followed. This is a judgment like a one, you can say, the Magna Carta for revision against acquittal is concerned. This is the one which Mr. Ghai will blurt out at any moment and on his feet in any court. He will stump any judge.
You never used to agree.
Opposite concept.
Justice Ahluwalia, if a revision application is filed in a matter where an appeal is provided for specifically, what would be the remedy that will lie to the applicant who has wrongly filed a revision application?
So that is in the section itself, if that's 401, it's a probably subsection 3, which says that if the part is wrongly filed. No, this is 401 subsection 5, which says when under this code an appeal lies, but an application for revision has been made to the High Court by any person, and the High Court is satisfied that such application was made under the erroneous belief that no appeal lies thereto, that it is necessary in the interest of justice to do so, the High Court may treat the application for revision as a petition for appeal and deal with the same accordingly. So your question is already taken care by the legislature in subsection 5 of section 401.
Right, sir.
You can read Mr. Palli 401. Mr. Palli, you can read 401 subclause 4 also, because 4 also deals with where under this code an appeal lies and no
Appeal is brought.
No proceedings by way of revision of appeal. So 5 follows 4. So if it is bona fide, then of course the court can always treat the revision as appeal.
The court can convert it also as an appeal. The court can convert it as an appeal into the appeal lies to session. It will remit back the matter, appeal to the session, or court can also say that wrongly it has been filed, we treat the revision petition as a criminal appeal.
Yes.
Which I have been following instead of returning the revision to say that it is immediately for the judge to curb the areas. He will immediately say that it's under the erroneous belief, I convert this revision into appeal.
Appeal.
Justice Ahluwalia has distinguished the powers of an appellate court from those exercised in revision. The High Court under section 482 of the Criminal Procedure Code also exercises its inherent power to prevent abuse of process of any subordinate court. I would now request Mr. Ghai to elaborate on the powers exercised by the High Court under section 482 of the CRPC. How is it different from the powers of the court under 397 of the CRPC, and whether the bar of 397(2) is subverted by invoking 482 of the CRPC?
As far as legal powers are concerned, sir.
No, just before that, we have to see how the term interlocutory order has evolved. As a legislature and by the court president, how it has evolved. That, yes, I think will be very interesting before we go to the power of 482.
Yes, sir. We can either deal with it right now. I believe Justice Ahluwalia, you can take that question, or we can come back to you after Mr. Ghai is done.
All right.
Whatever so you prefer.
I will just give a little overview.
Yes, sir.
So far, as you have given the history of legislature of drug, as you have rightly put that in the old Code of Criminal Procedure in 1898, there was no term as defined as interlocutory order, and there was not the power of the Revision Court was not clipped. It was not precluded. But to cut the area's delay, 1973 CRPC came with 397(2) that so far interlocutory order is concerned, there will be no revision filed against it. Now, the first time in case of Amarnath versus State of Haryana, question arose, what is interlocutory order? It was not defined as such. The court said in Amarnath they used the word as a quasi-final. They say there can be three orders, which are final orders resulting into conviction or acquittal. There's no dispute. Revision can be filed. There are orders, say, summoning the witness, adjourning the matter, and the various others issuing instead of summons, issuing a bailable warrant, non-bailable warrant regarding the diet money, so and so. These all are interlocutory orders. The court said there are quasi-final orders which determine the rights, obligation, or liabilities of the parties. These are the words used in Amarnath versus State of Haryana. However, that's another question Mr. Ghai will deal so far 482 power is concerned, Amarnath. Now, this question arose that this definition is too wide. Then they came to Madhulime versus State of Bihar. They said the test is because they refer to the civil case and refer to Justice Kani and Kuppaswamy's case, which he said that a case which is finally the case which come to an end, proceedings will terminate is the final order. That is the test. They said it is all right. They will terminate the proceedings, but even though right and obligations are determined, liability is determined, an order, if challenged, reversed, will terminate or culminate the proceedings, will be an intermediate order. So the term quasi-final used in Amarnath is a made an intermediate order. Intermediate order is one which, if reversed, will terminate and culminate the proceedings. A order of cognizance, if set aside by the Court of Revision, it will terminate the proceedings, will become final in nature. Say order of summoning in a private complaint, if set aside by the Higher Court, will terminate the proceedings and into culmination. Order of charge, if set aside, will tantamount to discharge of the accused. It will also finish the proceedings and the proceedings shall come to an end. So the test applied in Madhulime's case was that if an order under challenge raise objection and that objection is sustained and it results into termination of the proceedings, culmination of the proceedings, or proceedings come to end, it will be a final order. This will be an intermediate order. So the term which is used as a quasi-final order or an order of moment in Amarnath is further clarified by a test that if the order reversed will finish the proceedings, will be an intermediate order and it is subject to challenge under revision, lifting the embargo of section 397(2). So the court found a via media by a harmonious construction brought what is an intermediate order. So far so good, we had a history. Then came Special Court Act. It introduces section 11.1 which take away the power of revision from the criminal court so far prevention of corruption cases is concerned. So we have a case of VC Shukla versus CBI. In this case is a 4-judge bench. Yeah, author of Amarnath's case, Justice Faisal Ali, holds the right order of the moment, quasi-final order, and says that though it will be intermediate order, but as a corruption or prevention of corruption cases are concerned, because virtue of section 11.1 of the Special Court Act, this order of framing charge will not be interlocutory order. So we have a clear distinction of prevention of corruption act cases and cases falling in other jurisdiction of criminal jurisdiction, because in Prevention of Corruption Act cases, Section 11(1) of the Special Court Act before Prevention of Corruption 1988 took the form. Similarly, when the post scam case came, you came with the case of this Girish Kumar Suneja versus CBI. The citation I will give you, this is a very good judgment. This is Girish Kumar Suneja versus CBI 2017, volume 14, SEC 809. Here they took recourse to section 22 of the Special Court of the Prevention of Corruption Act, which take away the power of a revision from the criminal code. They said because the power of the revision is taken away by section 22, which is the Special Act Prevention of Corruption Act, therefore here the order of charge will be an interlocutory order, whereas other proceedings so far are concerned, order of framing charge will be intermediate order open to revision. Then this matter was doubted. Then we had a judgment of Asian Resurfacing.
Yes.
There they said, they never said that we will overrule. They said because of section 22, the debate will be highly academic. We will not develop on this topic, on this subject, on the point raised, because high courts have a power of surveillance under Article 227. Therefore, order framing charge can be subject matter of challenge under Article 227. So this is how the law has evolved. So please, to your listeners, to the students of law, and I'm also a student, I want to share that don't confuse, don't mix up so far Prevention of Corruption Act cases are concerned. So far, cases of IPC, cases of probation, cases of other acts are concerned, even so far the punitive action or the penal action under the Consumer Court Act is concerned, if the order which challenge will culminate the proceedings will be an intermediate order, it will be not interlocutory order, and it is a subject matter of revision. Now I hand over to Mr. Ghai. So far 482 is concerned, so far these interlocutory intermediate orders are concerned. Oh, sorry. So far Madhulima is concerned, they said a order which is not an intermediate order, but an interlocutory order, and it affects the rights and liability of the parties, it is amenable to 482. Yes, Mr. Ghai, sorry, I took it. I thought it's very necessary to do so.
No, sir. In fact, it's a beautiful narration, starting from Amarnath down to Suneja's case, from what the Supreme Court has called matters of moment to what they have now started calling intermediate orders. So there is a judicial recognition of the third class. I'm sure, like a lot of our doubts are clarified after listening to Justice Ahluwalia. So I'll invite now Mr. Ghai to talk about 482 and 397 and whether 482 is now started being used to subvert the bar by the legislature under 397 too.
Justice Ahluwalia has rightly said, unless we understand interlocutory orders and which are interlocutory, intermediate, and final orders, 482 we can play and say only when. If the order is interlocutory, we cannot go in revision. If the order is intermediate, it retains finality, we can go in revision. Final order, we can go in revision. So as far as 482 is concerned, although both 482 and 397, they operate in different fields, yet they overlap at some places. Like 397, if you have a power, if you have a remedy of a revision under 397, the question will be, can you go in 482? Still, now this was dealt with in the earliest judgment, which Justice Ahluwalia also referred, Amarnath's judgment, 1977. And in the judgment of Amarnath, it was held by the court that once you have a remedy of 397 under revision, that you can come before the higher court and the inherent powers will not be used by the high court. Now that judgment of Amarnath was later on dealt with in Madhulime, as Justice Ahluwalia has said, 1977 again. In Madhulime's judgment, the Honorable Supreme Court said that powers under 482 are entirely different and they are inherent powers, and the court can use it as and when it likes, and when wrong and do a right means the court can do it, but rarely. And as Justice Ahluwalia had pointed out, the court has to have restraint on itself to use 482. So 397 remedy does not mean that the court cannot interfere under 482. Now the second question which you asked was the bar, 397 bar of second revision, that 482 lies or not. This is what you said against the revision, if 397. Now 397, there's another exception that once you go before the Sessions Court, you can't come in second revision before the High Court. Now, as far as remedy of revision is concerned, in 482, it was dealt with three celebrated judgments. The first judgment was Dhariwal Tobacco, 2008 probably, in which it was held that 482 can be there even if there is revisional power, and the party can come under 482, and the court can, under inherent powers, use it and then deal with the case as it is. Now, thereafter, another judgment, probably Mohit alias Sonu came, another judgment came thereafter, 2013, which judgment said, no, these powers are different. Once the statute says 397.2, that revision will lie, interlocutory order, and then 397.3, the court in that judgment said the 482 parts can't be used by the court. Then thereafter, this matter is finally now settled in 2016, Prabhu Chawla's matter, and the Honorable Supreme Court has now settled the law that 482, the court has inherent powers, and under 482, the courts can deal with the matter in which you have the remedy of revision. So if you go in revision before one court and you lose, then the other higher court, that is the High Court, can interfere in 482 and use its inherent powers, because inherent powers are to be used as and when required for those things which are not defined in the statute itself. So court, the legality, propriety, etc., and everything according to law has been done by the lower courts, the supervisory power of which is with these courts. So 482, I say, can be used by these courts even where there is a remedy of revision.
Correct, sir. So a follow-up question to that would be that an application for revision under section 397 can be filed either in the High Court or the Sessions Court. We've understood that there is concurrent jurisdiction. Practically, sir, in your experience, which court is it preferable to file a revision application in? Is it the High Court or is it the Sessions Court?
Mr. Palli, as far as I'm concerned, we always, somebody came to me and he said that I want to go for questioning straight away after getting FIR registered. I said, no, go for anticipatory bail, and somebody else filed a questioning matter in the High Court. I was the other day talking with Preet Ahluwalia. I said the court granted interim relief in that also. So as a lawyer, I'll say, go step by step. Firstly, go to the Session Court. Why not avail that remedy which you have before the Session Court? File a revision there. Try to get relief there. And if you don't get relief, you have another remedy of 482 in the High Court. So you tell your client, go to the Sessions Court first, avail that remedy, and then come to the High Court. Why rush to the High Court straight away?
I may supplement Mr. Ghai here, if permitted.
Please.
Amarnath case said, so far a order which is intermediate order, since it is subject matter of revision, 482 will not be available. Madhulime went ahead. It says if order is not intermediate, it's an interlocutory order, you can challenge under 482. The three tests laid by Madhulime, I will just read quickly for everyone. The first is that the power is not to be restored if there is a specific provision in the court for the redress of the grievance of the aggrieved party. So if there is a power of a revision, you will not go to 482 because there is a forum provided for redressal of the grievance. It should be used, so for 482 is concerned, it should be used sparingly to prevent abuse of persons of any court or otherwise to secure the end of justice. And lastly, they said it should not be exercised as against the express bar of law engrafted in any provision of the court. So when you are using 482, the court has to guard itself that by virtue of filing a petition under section 482, it's not tantamount to second revision. The court will first use it that if it is only for to correct the order, sentence, or finding, or legality of it is or proprieties to be examined, the court will say nothing. The 482 tantamount to second revision. But If it is to prevent the abuse of process or to secure the end of justice, court will say that it will not tantamount to section revision. Taking a wide power of 482, it will test the order passed by the court below in 482.
That is what I said. In 482, you can come after the session court has declined your revision, but then it depends on the court whether you have that remedy available in the High Court. This is what I said.
You know, as always, I've supplemented you.
Sir, I'm here to learn from you. You know, always everybody learns from you, and I'm here to learn from you. But that remedy I said under 482 is available in the High Court. This is what I said.
You are too kind and generous to me, Mr. Ghai.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, I'll put the next question. I believe we've covered largely the heart of revisionary powers and its interplay with 482. I would like to open up for the questions from the House. One question that's come up, I like Justice Ahluwalia to take this. This is Ahluwalia. This is a question. It says, can a revision be dismissed in default? If yes, then can the application be reinstated?
See, the concept of dismissal of default in criminal cases do not exist so far appeal, so far your revision is concerned. Even also the complaint, the concept is not of dismissal in default. It is consigned to records. The exact word is none is available. Petition is consigned to records. Though in a word it means dismissal for default. Anyhow, if the complaint is dismissed for default, it pertains to summons case, then the appeal case equitable lie under section 256(2) of the CRPC. If the complaint is dismissed, the court below cannot restore it. It can only be restored by under 482 by the higher court, exercising inherent powers. So far revision is concerned, the courts should desist, criminal court should desist from dismissing any case in default. It should decide itself. Now here, to fortify my submission, I must read section 403 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. That is option of court to hear parties. Section 401, 402, it says, save as otherwise expressed, provided by this court, no party has any right to be heard either personally or by a pleader before any court exercising its power of revision, but the court may, if it thinks fit, when exercising such power, hear any party either personally or by pleader. So, therefore, revision is concerned, the presence of the party hearing them is not necessary. The court in itself, under 403, shall decide the revision. Therefore, it ought not to be dismissed. If it is dismissed, is under wrong version. The revision ought to be decided on merits or on technicalities, whatever it is. You can't shut a criminal case on a default. It's a concept which is alien to the criminal courts. This is my humble opinion, but they are to dismiss. And if you have to dismiss, you will use the word for non-prosecution.
Right. So the next question is from Shivi Sayam. He is a practitioner in Delhi. He asks, if an applicant dies during the pendency of the revision application, will the application abate or can it be carried forward by another on behalf of the deceased applicant? Mr. Ghai, if you could answer that.
Mr. Palli, probably the proceedings will not abate on the death of the person because they will be carried on. It is not like probably 394 for appeals, the abatement is there. For revision, there is no section like this. But as revision, I said, it can be suo motu, has an information of something which it feels is illegal and against facts. The court can always interfere. So even if the person who has filed a revision has died, the lot of it. This is my humble opinion. Mr. Ahluwalia can add if he feels. But I think if the court has taken the revision as it is and the man dies, even then it will continue.
If the revision is against conviction and the conviction has to affect the rights of the parties, so for service law, pension, etc. is concerned, a valuable right vests in the legal heirs. If the fine is imposed, the fine will be recovered from the estate it vests a right in the legal heirs. Therefore, in that conviction, if it is to obey, the legal heirs or the legal representatives can file an application that it should not abate and they can be permitted to continue as in section 394 referred by
394
Mr.
appeal.
A. But if it is a revision against summoning order, against a charge, nothing, then it has to die its own death. So in the revision, the broad spectrum is there. You have to see the nature of the revision and whether it affects a valuable right of the legal representatives or not. Say if a man is defamed and he files a complaint and his legal heirs say that the defamation or the libel affects the family, the repute of the family, then the legal representative can come and continue with the revision. So, but the onus is caused upon the legal representative to approach the court that it should not abate. And even if the court has pronounced that it has abated on the application file, the court should be liberally revise the revision to answer the question formulated in the revision. The revision by its nature is a suo motu to correct the error. Therefore, it's something vast than it's concerned. So if a question of law is raised in revision, you can't shut your eyes and say that we'll deal in some other way, the issue remains academically. You can't brush it aside. The court has to answer it.
So the next question is from Lucknow. There is practitioner Tushar Mittal. He asks, can a court, while exercising revisionary powers, call for additional evidence? Either of the panelists
I can just take it. For as far as additional evidence is concerned, under 391, of course, in appeal, the courts can. But in revision, probably the additional evidence cannot be taken because there's no section which says so, no power with the court. There's one power under section 398 for referring for inquiry, that is with the court under 203, etc. But as far as additional evidence is concerned, there's no power for additional evidence as revision because the court has to go into legality of the order passed. So for that reason, the court will not get the evidence recorded additionally and then come to the conclusion. Court will see the order which is passed and come to the conclusion whether it is illegal or against facts or correctness of the order. So as far as the order passed is concerned, the additional evidence will not be recorded in the revision.
I may add here, so far
Absolutely.
additional evidence is concerned, the party will not invoke additional evidence under so far section 391 is concerned, but they can take recourse to section 311. 311, I may just say.
I was talking about the appeal. I was talking about the appeal.
And then he will
So
say that under section 311, this evidence goes to the root of the matter, it may be taken. Let's have 311 quickly.
311 is during trial, 391 is during appeal. So I said since revision is as a form of appeal, so it
power to summon
additional evidence.
Let me read 311. Power to summon material witness or examine person. Any court, this is any court, maybe a revisional court, maybe appellate court, or maybe a Supreme Court, at any stage of an inquiry, trial, or other proceedings. Under this code, summon any person as a witness or examine any person in attendance, though not summoned as a witness, or recall and re-examine any person already examined, and such court shall summon and examine or recall and re-examine any such person in his evidence appears to be essential to the just decision of the case. So the party, instead of going for additional evidence, will file an application under section 311 saying that in any proceeding covers the revision petition, this evidence may be taken because it goes to the root of the matter. So the better course for the party will be to take recourse to section 311. This is my humble opinion.
Right. Now the next question is that is the following order an interlocutory order or not?
Please again.
It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. Yes,
The
Mr.
next question is whether this order is interlocutory or not, an order committing the case under section 209 of the Criminal Procedure Code, and why would it not be, or why would it be?
There is a difference of Code of Criminal Procedure of 1898 and 1973. In the code of 1988, it was the accused which was committed to the Court of Sessions. In 1973, it came that the accused is not to be committed, the case is to be committed. That's the difference. So before 1898, it was held the court of the magistrate while committing is not a post office. He has to apply mind, court of magistrate used to record evidence, allow the cross-examination, then along with evidence used to send to the session court. After 1973, it said, so for 209 is concerned, the court only has a ministerial power. Therefore, the court exercising ministerial power is not acting judicially. Therefore, it has to see whether the documents have been given, part of the charge sheet submitted by the police, any document is available, any statement is legible or not. Therefore, section 209 in the 1973 code is not an order which can be termed as a intermediate order. Therefore, if you have any challenge, you will come under 482. If your right is prejudiced, say some vital document, say some disk is there, some this camera recording is there, and this is not handed over, the person will go under 482. Revision is not available because order of the committal will not end the proceedings, even if reversed. So my answer is that the remedy will lie under section 482, not under the revision.
Correct. So the next question is, would an order passed under 156(3) dismissing or allowing an application be an interlocutory order or not? If Mr. Ahluwalia could take it, either one of you.
I can just try 156(3) because sir will supplement thereafter. As far as 156(3) is concerned, there is a controversy whether it is interlocutory order or not. This is what I feel. 156(3), there are different judgments of different high courts. The Allahabad and the Madras High Court have a different view. Delhi High Court and Bombay High Court have different view as far as 156(3) is concerned. Whether this will culminate into proceedings will culminate and it's interlocutory order or not. So these two, Delhi High Court and Bombay High Court, have held that these are not interlocutory orders, whereas the other high courts have said. I would like to add here one thing as far as 156(3) is concerned. When proceedings under 156(3) are concerned, the accused cannot put his defense and cannot go to the court and say that hear me. But once 156(3) proceedings end, and they end into dismissal, the other party comes in revision if it is allowed under 401. Then under 401(2), the accused has to be heard. So there's a bit anomaly which I feel. If in revision against the order passed under 156(3), the accused will be heard before deciding 156(3). But as far as the lower court is concerned, when 156(3) is going on there, accused has no right to be heard. But then it is interlocutory order. What I feel is rightly he is given a power, because once he has got an order in his favor from the lower court, then he has a right to be heard in the higher court in revision. So 156(3), there's a gray area. Most of the courts feel it's an interlocutory order. No finality has been attained. But as far as my view is concerned, and I feel it's a end of the matter ends there. 156(3), if it is not allowed, then of course the party can come against that order in revision. If it is allowed, then it is for the accused.
I agree with Mr. Ghai. This is a gray area. There is a different opinion, but we'll have to test the order passed by. Say if the magistrate say 156(3) application dismissed or the complainant dismissed, I'm not invoking 156(3). End of the matter. That finality has come. It vests a right in the complainant to go for revision. If 156(3) says no, I will treat this as a complaint under section 200, then it is not finishing the proceeding, then the complaint cannot go in revision, he can go on 482. What the crux is, the inherent character of order passed by the magistrate under section 156(3). You will apply the test laid in Madhulime to the nature of the order. You can't say in straight jackets.
Right, so the next we have time only to take one last question, and that's directed to Justice Ahluwalia. Your Lordship, Justice Ahluwalia, Mr. Sandhu from Punjab and Haryana High Court, he wants to ask, in a predominantly civil dispute, when the complainant reports the breach in contract as cheating, to give it a criminal color, on the basis of which summons are issued, and the accused prefers a criminal revision, would the revisionary court block out all evidence that the accused may have to prove his innocence?
See, we had a Delhi administration versus Satish Chandra, where they said at the time of framing of charge, the accused can put his defense and his documents will be taken into consideration. Then this judgment was set aside by the Supreme Court in state of Odisha versus Devindranath Pati. They say that the defense of the accused cannot be taken into consideration at the stage of charge. He can't be permitted to put these documents. Therefore, the revision is not permissible. However, their lordship held if the documents alleged by the accused are of a sterling quality, then the accused are relying upon those can approach the High Court in section 482 CRPC, and then the proceedings can be quashed.
Mr. Ghai, would you like to add something?
Say my thanks to.
No, not at all. I will never dare do that. I will never dare do that. Sir is right.
Mr. Pali, I must thank you. To me and Mr. Ghai, when we were practicing, no judge could hold over reins. You have held over reins so well. You have moderated so well. My all compliments to you.
Not at all, sir. I am unworthy of such praise. I hope I am able to measure up in future, sir. Sir, I would like to extend my gratitude to the panelists who took out their precious time for us to enlighten us for the betterment of all the young lawyers who practice in the high courts and the sessions court, and they face these problems on a day-to-day basis. And I'm sure after this webinar, every practitioner will approach this rather complicated topic with a little more clarity and confidence. And I must thank Mr. Tiwari and the Bar Council of Punjab and Haryana for giving us this platform to host this webinar.
Thank you. So nice of you. So great of you.
Thank you, Mr. Pali. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
tuning
Mr.
in.
Ghai. It was a good interaction. Meeting you after so long, interacting, igniting thought, and exchange of views, interaction. It's very meaningful. Thanks to all of you, and have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Pali. Thank you, Mr. Tiwari. It was really good to be here on the platform and meet you.
Where should I?